There we go. All right. So thank you guys for jumping into today's session. This is the third global engagement that we've run so far. The Damien and the board asked me to jump in and help facilitate. So my name's Elliot. I work for a company called ThinkPlace that does strategic design and facilitation and a whole bunch of stuff. But before that, I came out of the Australian parkour community, and I was part of Parkour Earth when it first started, but have since stepped away. So it's nice to be back in and helping out where I can. Today's session is, like I said, the third. So we've had the first session, which was with members of different federations and organizations. Some are members of Parkour Earth and some were not. Some were of associations from different places. That was discussion number one. Discussion number two, we had, when was it, end of last week, I think. And that was with a group of people we broadly called influencers, but you know, we had all sorts of voices from trying to get an input from people who were in touch with lots of other people. And then today, obviously, you're all here because you've got ties to making your professional lives out of parkour, and we wanted to get your perspective as well. And then in this first round of engagements, the final session we're having on this Friday is with anyone from the community. So we're hoping that this will be the first 4 sessions, but I think we already know that there's going to be a need for some other ones with different groups, probably in different languages, trying to reach a broader section of the community. Damien, I might just give you like a couple of minutes just to introduce to everyone what we're doing and what's your intent in this session.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say on the back of what Elliot just said there, so if you know anyone that wants to contribute and come along to that grassroots session, which it's my morning and so it's my tomorrow night, then there's space and everyone's most welcome to attend, so please pass that on if you know of anybody. But yeah, so I stepped into the CEO role at Parkour Earth in August last year officially, but we did do sort of a special plug earlier this year about that. And ever since stepping into the role, I mean, even while I was on the board, but certainly coming in as CEO, I really wanted to been thinking about, you know, what does an international sports federation that's being developed in contemporary times look like, given all the athlete activism and all sorts of things that we're seeing around the world, and then thinking about parkour specifically, what does the community want? And yes, we had federations come together and establish something because they wanted something democratic and set up by themselves that they felt that they could trust. But there's 9 in there at the moment, and that's not incredibly representative of the entire globe of community. So how do we build something that people can have buy-in into, that feel that they can trust, to feel like that their voice is represented, whether they have a national federation or not, because there's some countries that may never have or may never want that kind of organization, but they may very well want to have some kind of input and connection with Parkour Earth or any international federation parkour that could exist. So we think we have some good ideas and some cool ideas and things that will be supportive of the community, but we don't want to just assume. We want to actually hear people's voices. So as Elliot said, we did have federations come in, and we at the moment, those are our voting members. But does that have to be the way? That's the model that other federations do, but is that what Parkour Earth needs to do? Is that what an international parkour federation needs to do? So we're really open to hear from the community and in all sorts of different ways to challenge our thinking, to critique. You know, we can't grow if people don't ask us hard questions or give us cool ideas. So that's what these are all about. What could an international parkour federation look like? And how do we build that?
Awesome. Thanks, Damien.
And sorry, I will have to leave in about an hour because I have work. So. I'll have to leave slightly early, so all the best.
So just a really quick note before we dive into the content. I think Damien, that gives a really good context, but just in terms of what we're trying to gather in these sessions, I think, traditionally these sorts of engagements are often someone like the Parkour Earth board sitting up front, telling you what their vision is, and then non-anointed folk asking questions. We're trying to flip that around a little bit. This is very much so, like Damien said, there's some ideas in Parkour Earth, but this is a constructive session. There's absolutely opportunity to ask questions and to question what PKE has done to date, or sort of explore those things. But really, we're trying to gather content that the board can then use to make an informed strategy and formulate something that's based off, as much of the community as we can get meaningful engagement from. So please invite you as much as you can to be loud, make your opinions known. This is the place. We're going to be using a platform called Mural. I don't know if you've used it or not, but it's essentially a digital whiteboard where I'm just going to be jotting down your notes. I've just put a link into the chat. I'll be sharing my screen so you can follow along there, but if you're more of a solo flyer and you want to just jump in and put your own notes in, or follow along at your own pace as well, please feel free to do that. All right. So hopefully that's all coming up on your screen now. I think the first discussion, the first piece I wanted to have is just for all of you. I think many of you know each other, but while we're just getting started, if you can just introduce yourselves into the chat function, and just type in, who you are and where you're from and what's your connection in the parkour professional world, that'd be great. And then while you're doing that, I just wanted to hear from as many of you as I can, why did you join this session? What's your expectation out of this session? Why are you here? Blake, you're looking thoughtful. Do you want to kick us off?
Cool. Yeah, so Blake Evitt from Parkour Generations Americas, also from USPK. And I think the main reason I'm here is now that USPK is a member, I think getting involved is really important. And also, I know that we've been having our own discussions with USAG and realizing how this is influencing a lot of stuff. And just trying to get a pulse on how things are going internationally. And I think that the US has a bit of a role and a responsibility to kind of step up, because we've been largely absent in a lot of this discussion. And I know that sounds like the Americans saying that, yeah, they should take the lead on stuff, but I think we should be contributing, just like any of the other nations. And I think there's been a lot of really great work done, and I want to see how we can further that.
Awesome. Thanks. Any other expectations? Who else wants to jump in there? John.
Hi. Most people call me Hedge, call me John, it's totally fine. I run Access Parkour based in Scotland. I am also involved in a company called Art of Retreat, which brings what we like to think of as leaders within the parkour community together. And I'm interested in reaching out, forming connections, helping form communities, as well as helping parkour grow and also protecting parkour. And so my interest and expectations from this meeting are to discuss simple things that Parkour Earth can do well that benefits everyone. And so I'm generally of the opinion that you should do a few things very well instead of doing lots of things poorly. And that's the general way that I push things and how I want to contribute to Parkour Earth.
That's awesome. Thanks, Hedge. Who's jumping in?
Hi there. So I'm Enrique from Mexico. I'm working with FIMOVEM. We have been coaching for a while now. our interest in joining here is we know that there are currently several associations working on trying to rule parkour. So we are really interested in knowing how this is coming on along. Uh, we don't do competitions, so we want to know where everyone is standing and how everyone is going to be working now that there is this kind of conflict between uh, several organizations trying to manage the parkour globally.
Yeah, brilliant. Great. I know the rest of you introduced into the chat, which is great, but I also just wanted to make some space if you wanted to add in any other expectations or what you wanted to get out of this session. It's Andrew or Scott or Tom. Nope, happy chappies. Excellent. Okay, so I think, Hedge, you provided a really good segue there. Where we've started all of these discussions is in this piece of, why is Parkour Earth here? What's the point of having an international representative body, and what's the value that that organization is aiming to give? And I wanted to start the discussion there. All of you here have created something that in some way supports the parkour community. And I think I wanted to start the discussion to understand what is it that you're trying to support? What is it about parkour, or what is it that you're trying to protect, and by extension, what is it that Parkour Earth should be thinking about in terms of what it represents or what it's meant to be a governing body of? Yeah, John, Hedge.
Don't worry, I'll always talk if no one else does. I think the first thing that I would say with regards to the what is something that Jax and I have talked about, which is this idea of a lot of us who are now in business had a really unique experience with parkour in our early days, and we can tell you stories of the first days of parkour and how unique and how special it was and how it gave us something in our lives that was special. And from my perspective, I want to keep the space for people to have that special experience of creating their very own thing and doing their own movement. Really talking about this idea of, it doesn't matter exactly what it is, it matters that they get to have an experience of having created a thing. But at the same time, I want to layer in a certain amount of opportunity. So I want there to be an ability to create something new and different and unique and weird and wonderful, but I also want there to be an opportunity for that person to turn that thing into a career, which means we need to create sustainable jobs, and we need to create business models that work, and we need to have an industry that will support people as they grow and develop and build their lives. So those are my two things, though neither of them are directly, I think, linked with Parkour Earth. Those are my big whys. With Parkour Earth, what I imagine is an organization that sits in place, doesn't have to do an awful lot of things, but those things it does well and simply. And so my interest would be in international qualification recognition, what is and isn't viable, transfer of those qualifications between countries, and the ability to translate. So if Blake goes and does runs a qualification in America and the USPK recognizes it, then Parkour UK can recognize it, which means I can hire Blake's guys and he can hire my guys. And we have the ability to give coaches the ability to travel. That would be a really good example of the thing that I think that Parkour Earth is really uniquely placed to do. And so that would be an area, for instance, where I think Parkour Earth could be really useful.
Yeah, that's great. I know there's quite a number of coaches on the call. Any other thoughts in that sort of coaching standard space?
I think that that is probably similarly mirrored in a lot of the things that we would be looking for in terms of having international kind of recognition and kind of a standardization, or at least a recognized standard of quality for a lot of things, whether that's competitions or certifications or builds or events or whatever, or coaching. I think that all those things would really benefit from having some sort of common agreement or standard. I know this is one of the things that we're working on with USPK, but I think having international similar versions would be really helpful as well.
Can I ask on that question around standardization? Because I think this is a really tricky space in the parkour world. You know, I mean, Hedge, you mentioned there's this space to have something that's your thing and to create and interpret and, you know, have your practice as your practice. You know, how do we hold that intention with this idea of standardization and
yeah, and I guess maybe standardization is not necessarily the word that we want to use. I think maybe having a level of quality that I think, as most of us here would probably recognize, is that a lot of the original groups and companies and businesses that sprung up and are still here have a certain level of quality that has been upheld, but that is not necessarily inherent to all programs. And I think that it's in the business interest of all of us to make sure that we're keeping that level of quality, to make sure that we are representing ourselves to the wider world. So maybe standardization is not the word. If you want to use kind of quality level.
Yeah, I would probably be looking to use the word recognition there. So it wouldn't be, it would, I think for me, the most important part is not that we standardize, but that we can say this is of good enough quality, so that someone can go out and make something and it isn't good quality and they can do it in their own backyard and they can make it simple and cheap and easy. And then if they try and take it to the wider world, then we have some statements. We're like, well, it's not safe enough yet. It's not good enough yet. If you follow this, then we'll say it is of high quality. It is a thing that transfers. That's how I would see that conundrum being unwound.
yeah.
Well, I kind of agree with you, John. I think when it comes to the setting the kind of standards with this, I mean, we've already accepted that parkour has very many different types of movements and those sorts of things. So you can't standardize the content within the course, but what you can do is at least standardize the quality of those coaching courses. So I guess you could standardize it in certain ways, but it's not really a standardization. It's more kind of getting the quality up to a particular level and standard, and being able to maintain that, and being able to know that kind of quality is being upheld in some ways. So perhaps it needs a couple of checks and balances in place when it comes to that sort of thing.
I got a question here. How does the DAP system fit into this recognition of quality?
I could probably speak to that as a representative of ADAPT. ADAPT is a international coaching qualification, and I think there's definitely options for kind of collaboration on that, but I don't think that there's anything official yet between PKE and ADAPT.
yeah, so Parkour Earth has no relationship with any particular qualification, and at this stage, all Parkour Earth has made clear within our constitution is that we value non-standardization, in the sense that we value the diversity of the community and what's been developed at the grassroots level in various countries. So yeah, we have no particular stance on any particular qualification at this stage.
I think just based on our experience with USPK, one of the things that we are trying to do is really value the diversity of the community, and the fact that there are so many different certs out there is a strength, and we don't want to have one. And I would assume that PKE is similar in that respect. And I think that that's where a lot of the community's kind of potential comes from, is having a bunch of different options for people's preferences and styles.
Yeah, so I think we definitely want to have the multiplicity of having different coaching practices come into it, because parkour is that diverse. Different environments and different people produce different types of movement, and each of them are just as valid as everybody else. So when it comes to the sort of things, I think it would be more kind of that coaching course have the right checks and balances in place when it became a course. Did it go through the relative authorities and bodies from its education boards and education departments, et cetera, and put those checks and balances in, which would be able to almost standardize the kind of practice or the teaching methods that come out of, and the quality of teaching methods that come out of these coaching courses.
Yeah.
Also, sorry for interrupting. Also, what I've found specifically, if we take something like ADAPT, for example, and if you guys are looking into this, you can bear it in mind, it's very hard to duplicate. Basically for us in South Africa, to work the cost of doing the ADAPT program back into our currently, it's practically so expensive, it's impossible to do. I have 5 coaches at some stages, and to send all of them through all 3 levels of ADAPT is going to cost me in the area of 150,000 Rand. That's a yearly salary for a single, it's an annual salary for a single person standardly. It's really expensive for us to do when you work it back, and I think other countries will have the same problem. So if we do have that, I want to agree with Paul, rather have individual models, but have checks and balances so that it can actually happen on a national level rather than an international level, where content can be checked, but can be produced for that country and the demographics that goes with the country.
I think there's an interesting piece. If I try and bring it, to more of a principles level rather than and think of coaching as an example of different things that Parkour Earth might be able to be, I think there's an interesting concept there of if we're talking about an international practice of parkour, then it has to move beyond into some realms that are accessible at quite a broad experience of parkour. And that came up in the last call as well, talking about one of the issues that the way PKE has been communicating so far is, until recently, it was primarily in English. And there's that issue of accessibility that comes into it there. Can I bring the conversation just back into that first question around, what is it that we're trying to protect? I mean, Head, you used the word, it gave something special, which is it's in that right direction. But I want to hear from the group about, what is that thing? It's a super values, high level based question, but what is that thing? What is worth protecting? And then how does Parkour Earth come into it?
Before we go any further, because it's driving me crazy, are you looking for the word reciprocity? Nationally.
In terms of like recognizing
replicability would be
reciprocity.
Reciprocity.
Yeah, I suppose so. I was thinking also, like, how do you replicate that standard of quality, but through different means? You know, in one context, maybe adapt is the standard of quality. In another context, the adapt model might not be, it might be something else, but it replicates the quality, even if it doesn't replicate the format. That's sort of where my mind was, but feel free to tell me I'm speaking shite.
I mean, what I've kind of been hearing from the conversation, in my head, Parkour Earth would almost be kind of almost like a safety regulatory body, almost like, you know, when you're making a car, you can make a ton of different cars, but as long as you got seat belts, as long as you have airbags, as long as you have, these safety components and making sure you're not killing anybody in your car, then, you can make whatever type of car you want. That's kind of what I got from the conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'd imagine that applies again across whether it's coaching, whether it's competition, whether it's, whatever it is, there's probably a bunch of things that could go under here.
If I would come to try and answer your question of the unique thing about parkour, I'd probably start talking about jam culture. I'd probably start talking about how there is a certain amount, and there's a certain amount, I'm using that word very carefully, of equality surrounding being able to meet up in a public space and move. And a lot of where we came from was going out into public spaces and meeting strangers and moving with them and creating communities through that movement. That for me is very, very important. It's how it literally changed my life. Mm-hmm. And I think I assume that's true of almost everyone on this call to one extent or another. And if you were talking about what I want to protect about the sport outside of my own business interests, which is mostly about making sure that the people I care most about have the ability to put a roof over their heads and eat every evening, I would be talking about that experience of jamming, being able to move in the public space, and giving as many people as possible opportunities to do that.
So I think I would just echo what Hedge is saying. Like, it's inclusivity. That's the word. That's the thing that I'm trying to support. Is it's an inclusive practice for whoever wants to do it. And that's one of the main things that I want to support.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. At the end of the day, I love parkour. I love the movement. But what kept me there for 10 years and, why I came back is just everybody is so friendly, and there's kind of a sense of belonging you can find in parkour that I think a lot of people are missing, especially at a lot of the stage of the life where they do join, in their teens or whatnot. And I think that's like a really, really powerful experience.
I think it has been a really powerful experience. I'd like to know, because I'm on the board. My name's Paul. How would you see Parkour Earth as an international body best serving the community in terms of providing for that situation and making that situation a lot easier and safer to come by?
I mean, I'm biased because you're already working on the movement card, which is run by my friends. So that's a really good example of an initiative which has the potential to help a lot of people by clarifying the law in a lot of areas. Another place, I think, one that I think those of you in the Australian community can probably talk really well to is this idea, because I know it's been discussed a lot in the Australian parkour community, this idea of diversity and getting a wider range of people involved in parkour rather than the classic middle-class privileged white boy, and figuring out ways to make that jamming experience feel safe for people from different backgrounds. Figuring out, we had a great set of conversations over the lockdown period about how to go about interacting positively with public spaces and what steps people could take to, if it's your space and it's a space in your city, how you could contribute positively to that space and contribute to the different stakeholders in that space. And how I see Parkour Earth interacting there is providing resources. So figuring out who knows the answer to some of these more difficult questions, like how do you interact in a space in a positive way, and then giving that information to as many people as possible in a manner that is most helpful for them and engaging with them personally, because when you give out generic information, it's actually not particularly useful. So it's a general rule, if I create a guide to the way to interact with people, public spaces in Scotland, it's not going to be of any help to South Africa. So how do you, the first stage is to find experts. And the second stage is to then put in the hard work to make that advice useful for each individual person. So you're actually contributing positively to their individual experience. So that's equity and equality and inclusivity. And I'll shut up now.
No, that's great. And I think it touches on this. I'm working at the moment also with Plan International, international NGO that works with mostly gender equality for young people. And we've been speaking a lot about this tension between how do you create a global body of knowledge that's also able to be locally contextualized. What gender equality is in the UK, where they're headquartered, is incredibly different to what gender equality is here in Senegal. But how do you distill that principle so that it's useful for people and it doesn't just end up being sort of abstract gobbledygook? Or it provides the foundation for someone to adapt into their local context. I think there's a really interesting piece in there.
Well, hopefully, if Parkour Earth does its job of engaging well, then it will be able to find people who are experts, and then the actual work doesn't need to be done by Parkour Earth. It instead can be done at a more local level. So it's about the countries taking on a certain amount of ownership of themselves. So Parkour Earth doesn't need to be the knower of knowledge, it needs to be the facilitator of discussions.
I think there's also a role there for Parkour Earth to be the kind of the repository for that information and the middle, or kind of the library in essence of all that information from different languages. Because I think right now there is definitely a vacuum and not necessarily an easy place to find all that information, apart from the Parkour research Facebook group, which is not a very effective means of distributing information. And I think that would be a great use for Parkour Earth to be that holder of knowledge.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines where Parkour Earth can be kind of that repository of knowledge, especially for actionable information. Like a lot of times, I swear, like every week on the, Jimmy the Giant Discord server, we have somebody asking, like, I train alone, how do I find people to jam with? And the answer for us anyway was kind of just creating your own jam, and we had no idea how to do it. And it's a very intimidating experience to go out there and just be like, I'm doing a jam, and then just have nobody show up. So I think having that, like you said, there's going to be definitely a lot of differences in the local cultures and application of that process. But I think even creating a guide where you help direct the practitioner to ask the right questions so that they can apply it to their own, context. I think that would be a really great thing to have. It's just, how can you get the people who want, a lot of these little things, how can you get them to ask the right questions so that they can adapt things properly to their context?
Yeah, yeah. Cool. So we've talked about, there's a couple of bits in there that there's sort of this jam culture, but I think more broadly around just community and accessibility and inclusivity for a broad group of people. There's a function that's coming out there around the library of knowledge, and also around how do you create that transferability internationally of certain levels of quality. I want to just, as a bit of a thought prompt, just to go over as well, this is some of the content, this top bit from the first session, and then these bottom yellow postcards from the second session. You know, and we talked in the first session around some of the issues that we know with Parkour Earth. We know there's, you know, a lack of clarity, and as a result, some skepticism that's come out. We also talked about this need that this organization jumped out of the fight against FIG, but then also pretty quickly became clear that it needed to move beyond that. There were a bunch of other pieces under there. And then those green post-it notes were sort of these statements of purpose that we talked about in the future around being a voice for all countries, but having this democratic concept under how we do that. Creating this defensive bit as well, which is still applicable. Connecting experienced organizations with emerging ones. I think that starts to touch with almost what we were talking there about, you know, the library of knowledge and extending knowledge. In this case, we were talking about it within organizations, but I think it applies more broadly. And then an externally facing thing. In the second conversation as well, we talked about, you know, I think this is the conversation we were just having then, you know, stay out of direct engagement with doing Parkour business, but that doesn't mean don't provide you know, if you want to start a coaching business, here's how other people have done it, or here's how you might turn it into a career, or here's some career options. So there's a bunch of other things in there. I mean, if you look at all those, if you look at what we're talking about, the picture that's starting to emerge for me from these 3 sessions is around, there's a holder of knowledge, a setter of quality, both to communicate it within the community, but also, you know, by extension, it almost excludes what is not Parkour or what is not quality, and it makes a really clear statement about that. Is there anything else in that around, you know, what is that fundamental why of the international organization? What is it that we're meant to be representing there? And yeah, anything else under that top level discussion you wanted to add in before we jump to the next one? Yeah, Hedge. And please, you guys are being so polite. Feel free to just talk. You don't have to raise your hand.
For me, when it comes to that discussion about skepticism about PK Earth and skepticism about this organization and who can do what, kind of my general base visceral response is do a couple of things really well so that we know you're valuable and that you can do things well, and build a reputation of competence. And then you don't need to do everything. You can't do everything. Do a few things, choose a problem and solve it, and you'll get kickback, sure, but solve a problem and choose a problem and solve it. That would be how I would talk to that entire part of the discussion.
Just for interest's sake, are there things that for you are sort of completely out of the scope for what you'd think Parkour Earth would be doing?
Don't tell me how to run my business. It's a pretty good one.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I was going to say run it really well, but
As we're going through all of the, I'm trying to. I always been discussions like these. I find them very interesting. But I always see that we've got a whole page full of ideas, and bringing them all together, like Edge also mentioned, is almost nearly impossible to do only on a Parkour Earth level. I do want to know, because I know of FIG, and I know basically what came from that, but how did they solve some of these problems? I understand that they have a fixed curriculum and that they can just press down no matter, and make it work, whether it's Japan or America. But if we look past that, how are other federations actually solving problems like communication on a international versus national level? Have we done that study? I know I haven't. That's why I'm curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I definitely think you're right about some of the work is done purely by literally creating a standard that essentially every other sport has rules and all this defined stuff. It is all built around competition. And so one of the key primary focuses of all the international federations is on overseeing those aspects. And so once you've got a set of rules, those are typically stay relatively similar with only small challenges, and so all of those things get translated. All of these bodies have more money and a lot longer histories, and so there's already a lot more countries and people connected with them. So gymnastics, for example, is even older than the IOC, so they a strong, powerful body with all of these connections. But I think we could also say that in some ways these organizations aren't doing as best as they can with some of this work around including people and ensuring voices are heard, because of the pushback we're seeing more and more on the international stage within sport. But Parkour Earth is in communication with a number of other international sports federations that are in similar kinds of positions or experiencing similar kinds of threats or just stage of development. And so we are starting to talk to I don't have any direct answers to that question, but we are engaging with these other organizations to better understand, how have you done this in your space? Very different activity, but what have you done? We'd love to learn from you and collaborate with you, not not with a interest of being part of the boys club, but just of, what could it be like?
A wheel that's already been done.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think from your intro at the beginning, Damien, talking about there's kind of a set way that the international federations already operate, but that has a bunch of pitfalls that are sort of, I suppose they're probably accepted just because that's the way we do things, and parkour being what it is has a nice opportunity to not go down that same path just because it's the way it's already done.
Yeah, like when we were drafting up the general themes of these conversations, one of the things that I was very interested in was, well, if our whole parkour practice, our going out into the world and climbing on stuff, and we have these people say, oh, that's not built for that, and then you say, no, I recognize that wasn't the original intention, but look what we're able to do with it. Look what we're able to turn it into. Look at the increased value, the cultural value, the economic value of not having to build something separate or different and just reinterpreting how it can be used and ascribing different value to it. Surely that can be the same with how we develop an international and national federations. And our culture and community in general. If that's what our practice is like, then if we are creating formations and organizations, what could they look like in the same? How would you compare parkour versions of these things to more, traditional versions of these things?
And that's a brilliant segue to where I wanted to go next. This was a discussion we've wanted to have for quite a while, which is around, if we think about first reference point, non-parkour federations, international federations, and they have this certain way of, it's probably not unfair to say, pretty directive, top-down management structure. That principle of how Parkour Earth as an organization needs to operate, needs to engage with people to push out content or direction or whatever. What are the principles of parkour that translate into how an organization is run? I think that sort of starts us off in around reinterpretation, but what can we take from the practice itself that we should be building into the way that the organization operates?
Could you kind of say that in another way? I'm not sure I quite get where the question is going.
Yeah, sure. So I think, and Damien, feel free to clarify or jump in, because I think you were quite interested in this question. Parkour philosophy is always a hot topic, or especially in those really early days of practice, and what makes parkour unique from the way that it's practiced, and what makes it parkour and not jumping off shit. And that whole breadth of philosophy underneath the practice. Are there things we can take from that approach to the movement that translate into the way that we should also manage the organization?
Yeah, I'll share an example of a New Zealand context. So in the development of our coaching pathway, which includes both professional development that's just standalone to help support people in upskilling, as well as a qualification, we have looked at, I guess, the pathway, the progression of practice from getting into parkour, training parkour, becoming a coach of parkour, and then the development of coaches. So how did we practice parkour? We went out, we explored, we taught ourselves, maybe we watched some videos, but it was very much together. We explored this practice in these spaces as a community of people. And so then if we're thinking about how do we coach parkour, rather than just going straight to what other sports do and having all this standardized stuff, how do we enable the practitioners and the students themselves to experience what we experienced? How do we create a platform that enables them to discover and learn the stuff without just handing all these answers over, because that's what the conclusions that we came to. So how do you create that space? And then from a coaching development space, we wanted to do the same thing. So when we have coaches coming in, we're not saying this is the way you are, this is what a good parkour coach needs to be. We want to hear from you about what you think your needs are, what your values are, what are important, what you think are lacking in your skill areas, so that we can help develop those spaces and do it collectively. So we've built that up from what we felt our experience collectively was in our actual training practice, and then we've scaled that back into the different structures of coaching and then coach development. So I think there is a way to look at the practice and then scale that up into elements of organizational practice.
When you talk about it in those terms, the thing that occurs to me most strongly is motivations to move and motivations for health. And I think this is definitely coming from a very Scottish-centered perspective, but just kind of, so much of society is sedentary, so much of society is unmoving, and sport is linked with ability to perform. And so a thing we often hear is, oh, exercise isn't for me because I'm not very good at it. And one of the things that I think is important to the human experience is dropping that value that links performance and practice, and letting people move because it's an engaging, intrinsically motivating experience. And one of the most powerful things that you get from parkour is this intrinsic motivation to move because you want to complete a challenge. And I think it speaks, one of the things that you often find, a lot of parkour practitioners, not speaking for everyone, love computer games because it gives you that same level of challenge at the right level to always be pushing and going a little further. And that iteration and improvement feeling is a really positive way to engage with life. And so one of the things that I think we try and teach with parkour is that it's a grounding practice of movement that then impacts the way you see the world around you, and you begin challenging yourself more and more to complete first physical tasks, and then tasks linked with your physical capabilities, and then more generic tasks like your ability to have a parkour approach to your job and your way you do your finances and everything else in your life. And one of the core parts of why I pursue the career I do and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to open more people's eyes to the fact that you can live your life in a manner where you're motivated to do cool things because you want to, and not just to be the best or to be like, it's not about performance, it's about engaging and enjoying the experience. So maybe figuring out a way for the governing body to hold on to those ideals about enjoying the experience and not getting caught up in performance and standards and having to do a thing because it's hard, and instead just enjoying yourself. Maybe I kind of got lost halfway through that point. Sorry.
I like it though. I mean, to me, when I'm thinking about what's happening internationally with a lot of athlete activism and issues with, you know, the hosting of the Olympic Games and all sorts of different things, you know, there's stuff that pops up for me around having an international federation where there was some research came out recently about how much money goes to the IOC versus how much money the athletes themselves in the Olympics get. And it's ridiculous. You know, the comparison is tiny for the athletes, but heaps for the, you know, the executive, the board members basically of the IOC get a per diem, which basically is a sort of to cover their expenses, and they get like $900 or 900 pounds or euros or something a day just to attend the Olympics. And so, whereas, you know, there are lots and lots of athletes who actually go to the games who, you know, it's their dream to do this thing, and they have to scrape by just to get there. And there's, you know, all this lack of support. And so the scales are very tipped in a specific direction that, that's one thing where I guess the actual people who do the activities are marginalized by the people who are organizing these things, which I would hate to happen in a parkour context. The other thing I see as well is that where you start to see athletes' health is secondary to the performance, as Hedge is kind of talking about. Performance becomes key and becomes the priority, that it no longer, sport is no longer about well-being. It's about winning, it's about performance, it's about money, it's about views, all these other things. And you can argue that there's things in there that have value, but when they become the most valuable thing, then people's health and well-being, they become aren't the first and most important thing. And I think there's an important thing for Parkour Earth to make sure that people and humans are more important than other things that come later.
Yeah, I think
will add
what you
here,
just said.
Go ahead.
No, go on, Ricky, on you go.
Okay, so I wanted to clarify something here, that actually sport is about performance. So physical activity is not about performance. You can go jogging around and you're not running, but if you're running a marathon, then it is about performance. So I think it's important that we as a community, or even Parkour Earth, makes this distinction, because otherwise, how can you say that sport is not about performance, but then have competitions doing sport parkour who is about performance, right?
I think the difference there is that, yeah, you know, sport by definition is about performance, but it doesn't necessarily have to be performance against other people. I think a lot of it is sport for the sake of, you know, competing against yourself or bettering yourself. Because, you know, with your example of marathons, most people who enter marathons are not there to win. You know, most of them are there to see if they can accomplish a marathon or see if they can get a better time than they used to on a marathon. You know, because they're usually such big events, and, you know, most people don't have a chance of winning one, right?
I think maybe performance at all cost is perhaps
Yeah.
more appropriate as to what I was referring to. Yeah.
Look,
Sorry, go ahead.
So from my point of view, I've always seen Parkour Earth as kind of mediator between the two worlds. So yes, there is the extreme of there's communities out there which are completely against organized or formal competition formats in their work, and there are other communities which are all for it. I believe that there are both types of people in the world, and Parkour Earth's goal is not to lord one over the other, but to provide the platform for which these groups of people and ideas and ways of engaging with each other can exist and exist mutually. I think what's happening with, and that's one of the reasons why FIG is there, and it shows in their way of being, is that they're so competition orientated. They want to find a competition for everything. And they want to drive everything towards that competition. Whereas Parkour has really born out of the community and the wealth of knowledge in shared practice and experience rather than in competing against one another. And we experience competition within ourselves rather than overtly against each other, but rather with each other. And it's the fundamental philosophical difference I find between the two that we have. But it also influences our practice and the provision of the services that we have as businesses, because we don't produce our classes or our way of coaching and our service to our students and clients in the same way that we would as if we were completely geared towards finding the top performer and sending them off to competition. And as Parkour Earth, I think we'd want to look towards facilitating that in some manner. And I guess we're asking you as businesses, how would we best facilitate that culture within your businesses so that it supports your businesses, so that so that we create that sustainable ecosystem of knowledge and practice and coaching within the communities, within your communities.
So from my perspective, I find that discussion fascinating. We'd have it all day, but the short answer is that we don't need there to be no competitions. We need to remember that the outcome is not to win a competition. And I think that can produce a healthier way of looking at the world and create a way of looking at the world that can include a competitive environment in a really positive way, which is enjoyable.
Yeah. Can I ask a hypothetical? Because I feel like this point touches on it, but maybe my mind's making a jump that it shouldn't. I guess the question I want to pose to you guys is, like, would you rather an international body that's cashed up, extremely, extremely efficient, amazing at what it does in terms of organizing Olympic competitions, setting standards, blah, 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 but has very little interest in the community, is doing it for not great intentions, kind of is just there to make a buck, but does it really well? Or an organization that's maybe half as good, but has a more grassroots, genuine feeling? I mean, what do you like genuine and not as good, or extremely awesome, but kind of doesn't care about you?
I think if you're asking a lot of business owners in general are probably going to go for the extremely awesome one that is protecting their business interests. But I think a lot of people that are kind of practitioners themselves are going to want to go for the genuine. So I think as a representative of both of those, I guess my question would be, why can't we have a really awesome one that is also genuine?
Blake wants us to have our cake and eat it too.
Isn't that the point of cake?
I kind of wanted to. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go. You're on.
So I kind of want to talk about the perspective from my business, which is going to be we do more sponsorships. We're not like a coaching business or anything. We make ramen, and I just want to be involved in the community in terms of supporting opportunities and supporting community. But from like a sponsorship perspective, nowadays it's not all about performance anymore. With the advent of Twitch and with the advent of YouTube and a lot of these channels where the athletes or personalities are a lot more directly accessible, the person who's doing the best isn't necessarily the person that is the highest value to a business. If you look at some of the top streamers in the world, they're good at video games, but Shroud is incredible at shooting things. But at the same time, he's not, if you put him in a true professional setting, he's not going to be the best anymore because, he's old when it comes to, the reaction times and everything. But because he's a personality, he is worth way more than a lot of the pros nowadays. Right now, organizations are worth more than the individuals, and individual personalities are worth more than skill. So I guess what this comes down to is that, I think Fig is probably a lot more stuck in the old mindset of the best is where the money is. And I don't think that's true anymore. I think there can be a lot of competence and a lot of business opportunity in just people who are cool and willing to put themselves out there in a grassroots manner.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really insightful. Thanks, Scott, for jumping in. We'll see you next time.
I was going to answer on the question that you posed as to having the two opposites you gave. Just clarify that again. It was having something that's really effective but not as genuine versus something that's less effective but more genuine. Am I correct?
Yeah, exactly.
As a business owner, specifically looking at from my point of view, I would prefer it to be both, to have the cake and eat it, because staring at cake that you can't eat is just silly. But practically speaking, people would rather or I would end up going for the more effective one, because your smaller institutions, your lower down the tree guy, never really gets to the half done but really good intentions. And they're lost in it, so it means nothing to it. So you have a smaller base that you're reaching. Am I making any sense in what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it is chicken and egg. I feel I would like to have both, but Fig has, as the example is going, has a further reach, even though it's not necessarily as pure as we would like for it to be, than what another one could be, and we have to bridge that.
So this kind of goes back to
Could I throw in, could I throw in a spanner in the works here? Essentially, you have the two options of the awesomely powerful one that could grant your wishes immediately, but is ultimately there for ulterior motives, or you could have the genuine one, which is run a little bit slapstick to that one, or not as well as that one, but could blossom later on during the line into the awesomely great organization that you want it to be, would you be willing to wait for that sort of situation to happen?
Paul, quite honestly, to answer, for some of these small crews and small parkour academies, they simply just switch when the time comes if the one proposition seems better than the other.
I really like
Tom,
I really like what Andrew said when he was talking about how the smaller groups will respond to these things, because it's something that we're seeing quite a lot, which is that the well-meaning grassroots organization links up with the well-meaning guys who can integrate with it, but that comes from a place of privilege. The reason that we can sit down and engage is because we have the facilities and ability to do so, and there's lots of groups and lots of organizations that don't have the ability to have these discussions, and so we'll link up with that bigger, better org. And one of the really important things is to create something which can help people and is positive, so that they will come on board when the time is right. And even if we create a thing and it's not perfect and a whole bunch of people join FIG, they'll probably eventually move into our one if we're more useful to them in the long run once we've built it, and it will take longer. And we shouldn't prejudice against other groups, and we shouldn't create barriers to entry if they're with the bad guy. Instead, we should create a better option. So one of the things, I think a really good example of this right now is how great, how really well USPK has rolled a lot of their organizations into their governing body, because they're doing some things and they're doing them well, and they're producing something of value. And so people are coming and joining USPK. And so it's suddenly huge where it wasn't before. And that ability to do things well and then to bring people in, I think, is a very important part of how you answer this question. Because the answer is, I think, as Andrew said, the big one is the one that's going to win, because capitalism, yay. But actually, we need to beat that.
Yeah, there was a really a similar, but it really struck a chord with me, point made in, I think it was in the last group in the influencers piece, where there's a whole bunch of people where this argument about don't take FICE money or don't take FIG money because it's inauthentic. There's a bunch of people that are just trying to put food on the table, or just trying to turn what they're passionate about into something that they can do full time. And for them, it's not, and it can't be a moral decision when the stakes are that high. I think there's a really interesting point there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to kind of like a beggars can't be choosers kind of thing, is that you're not going to turn down something that's going to be, you know, way more lucrative than having no opportunities at all, right? And I think this goes back a little to like a couple conversations ago, where Damien was talking about kind of the way that their organization in New Zealand was. But I wanted to kind of bring on the point of I think the grassroots organization has the opportunity to be a much more empathetic organization, where you know, definitely like these meetings where you know, anybody can join and they are put out in public, where you can feel more like part of it. Now that might not be quite as applicable immediately to business owners, where they say, oh, there's, you know, you're not having the direct value that, you know, a big organization like FIG is in terms of monetary gain. But as far as just kind of legitimacy in the eyes of the average parkour practitioner, I think there is a lot of value in that kind of empathetic communication, because that's kind of, just from my perspective, that's basically what we run Bite Ramen on. it's like, you know, with most companies, they're going to be like, okay, we're going to develop this product, then we're going to figure out what, you know, what are the values and features and, you know, the big, you know, things. And for us, it's we write the email to the customer first, then we figure out what you know, kind of like the big selling points are. And that kind of goes back to my point where I think having that grassroots organization can be lucrative for business owners, because if you are communicating that properly, and if you are being honest, and if the average practitioner does trust you, there's that legitimacy and that want to support, and money does come with that, as we've experienced. I don't know if that's like super clear. I think I went through like 3 or 4 different things there, but yeah.
No, I mean that makes total sense to me. It's classic sort of human-centered design principles around don't build it and they will come. Like build the thing that the people want by engaging them, by asking them, by having them own it and be part of it.
Yeah.
If we can think about the history of parkour for a second with regards to that, we're full of inauthentic actors that we trusted for a while, then we figured out who they really were and we kicked them out. And if you want to talk about longevity, you can't have that process. Blake's laughing because he knows what I'm talking about, but like he's the classic example, but Take Flight's another really good example of someone who came in, made a lot of money from parkour, but we figured out that they were the wrong kind of authentic and we kicked them out quite fast. And when it comes to parkour, you don't want to go through that same cycle. You want to be doing it right from the start, and that takes longer. But those guys who've gone through that process are in it for the long haul, and they are of value, and you don't make a splash as fast, but eventually you do get through because you're doing good work.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, I was just saying that's a good point. I like it.
I think one of the pieces that's really important for that, and I think harkens back to our talking about diversity earlier, is having some entry level opportunities and resources available for smaller organizations that are just starting out in smaller kind of representative groups, to be able to not have to take like the free t-shirt and put your logo on this page here and that's your representation, but to actually have real useful resources available to them. So they're not essentially getting swindled by that person that's offering them like a spot in this fancy competition in a t-shirt for no money.
I've got to leave very shortly. So first off, I just wanted to say, usually we wrap up and it usually passes over to me to say some final words, but I just wanted to thank everyone so much for their thoughtful comments, and the conversation has been really cool. And with the amount of stuff that gets added to the board, to the mural, it's really cool, and I'm really glad that we're reaching out to so many different actors within the scene, because it brings so many different perspectives and flavors, and we want to continue to expand on that. So I just want to say a very, very big thank you to everyone so far, and just to check, usually we'll have a Q&A type period at the end. So so Paul is here, Janne is kind of here. He's just come back from a big jam, so he's pretty wasted, but tired perhaps is a better term, so they can answer some questions. But if there was anything that anyone wanted really pointedly from me before I leave, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, Elliot will continue facilitating.
I wanted to ask, because I think one of the big things that we've seen in parkour is that we're all like a very philosophical bunch. I feel like we're very good at talking about these big concepts and everything. I wanted to know if there's like a roadmap, or if you're planning to publish a roadmap with like very actionable sort of tasks, whether it's through for the influencer stuff or for the business stuff?
Yeah, so the plan with all of this is, one, to begin this initial engagement process. We get all the stuff. The next step for us is to find out how we can connect with the groups who, as Hedge was talking about, don't have the privilege of just being to jump on, jump online and do this kind of work. So there's a few people that have reached out that have said, hey, is there a way that we could take what you've developed for these sessions and actually get communities to run them themselves in their own languages, with their own communities, with people who may not have access to the internet or can't access the time zones or all those sort of things. So there's that period of the next stage, as well as our surveys that are continuing to be translated into other languages. So please help share those out with people that you know who are non-English speakers. In terms of collecting information, but ultimately all of that is to lead to a roadmap of actually what is Parkour Earth going to do, who's going to be involved in doing that, and where's the direction, what's the vision, what's the strategic plan, and we definitely plan to make that kind of stuff available and viewable.
Okay, awesome.
Any other questions for Damien before he runs off? There were also, just so you guys know, there's some questions down in this section of the board that were asked last time with some answers under them. Sound like a free man, Damien.
Cool. Thank you guys again so much. Thank you, Elliot. Look forward to seeing the rest of the conversation. Don't forget to press stop on the recording when you finish, Elliot.
Thanks. So actually that roadmap piece sort of, again, nicely segues. We've talked about some really specific things around quality standards, library of knowledge, but I wanted to go a bit of a layer deeper and talk about quite specific areas of focus. Or we've talked about what are those easy routes that we can provide for new organizations, or what are those bodies of knowledge to help people break into whatever the thing is that they're trying to do. You guys are deep in it. As business owners as well, you've gone through a lot of the hard slogs. I mean, what are those pieces that if you had to do again would have been made infinitely easier if there were resources out there?
I got a one here. So for identifying these persons that actually came up causing more damage in the end that good. One thing that we found that was that we haven't had a clear expectation on what was valuable in a person for coaching, for example. So if we do not set a set of I don't want to say play the standards, but if we don't set a set of the minimum standards that a person has to have as values, then we are going to end up having a bad time with them. It's just a matter of time.
That's a really interesting one. There's quite a lot in there. Are you talking about these sort of inauthentic actors? I mean, Take Flight came up before. It's a great example of a business that's proposing to be for the community and then turns out it's not? Or are these people that come into your community, as individuals or as practitioners?
It's kind of both, actually. So we have had very nasty situations before where, for example, some kind of molesters coming up into our groups, and we weren't actually being able to recognize them because they were like really nice and really open to everyone and really approachable until, well, they got found out. So we have to kick them out because they were a risk to the community, right? But this goes up to any level on the organizations, right? So if we don't have a set of values and we see that this person does not have it, we can say, okay, we cannot let you in right now. These are the things that you need to work on yourself. Then we can keep in touch with you, and then we will talk later down the road. But right now, you are not. You're probably going to cause us troubles down the road. We don't actually say that to them, but that's the feeling in this conversation.
Yeah, it reminds me of a situation, and let me check if this sort of fits into this bucket. When I was leading the Australian Parkour Association, we had complaints against a particular coach who was being not quite a molester, but certainly inappropriate towards female students. And I was the head of that organization, and I was just a practitioner that ended up there because I was super passionate about it. And all of a sudden I was having to deal with a legal issue of how to navigate a sexual harassment claim. And it's not quite how to recognize that person from before, but what do you do when that does happen? As like, what do you as a small not-for-profit practitioner who just loves the community part of it actually respond? How do you manage a situation like that and not cause damage to the community? Does that fit in a similar bucket, or?
Yeah, kind of. So what I'm saying here is that if you gave someone power over anything, in case in this case we're talking about a coach, for example. So if you have somebody actually guiding physically somebody else, then there is always a risk in there, right? And you have to be aware of so many things. But if you as an organization fail to recognize that a person is not it's not really qualified to do what you want them to do, and you allow them anyway, then the one that at fault is you as an organization, right? Because the legal consequences are going to go over you as an organization. So yeah, I think it kind of fills in the same pocket.
I think that's where the need for a common set of kind of value statements and standards for onboarding coaches and onboarding team members and having shared injury data, like these are all things that PKE can serve as a repository for, or like an infinite information kind of library of sorts, and that's where the value comes. I don't think dictating that from the top down, but collating resources together.
Something that Parkour UK is presently going through, which is that we're trying to kind of give really good, clear examples. So what does a risk assessment for parkour look like? What does a child protection policy look like? What does protection of vulnerable group code of conduct? And they don't have to follow them. Like it should never be a prescriptive thing. It should never be, you have to follow this, but your life is a lot easier if you can get access to variations of these documents. And if we can give them to countries where the regulations are not as tight as, say, Scotland, then likely we can help them protect their members and protect their communities better. And we can't, protect them from malevolent figures coming to join the communities, but we can definitely give them the tools to work on it themselves.
And there's also a lot of value to being able to share that data afterward. And I think that's the other big component or big opportunity for PKE is to be able to collate information from different NGBs around the world and then create larger stats about parkour's involvement, engagement, diversity, because I think that helps all of us. I know that as a business owner, having access to statistics about parkour's growth and how it's developing is really valuable, both on a micro and on a macro level. And so if something were to be done from a much larger perspective, from that macro level by PKE, that's hugely valuable.
You mentioned a couple in there around growth. You mentioned injury before. I mean, what are those sort of top line ones you'd want to see? What are the useful ones?
I would say that injury data is always a really useful one from a business perspective. I think the growth information about how parkour is growing, where it's growing, and then the other big one is diversity, and that's one we've talked about. That I think is also an area where PKE needs to be focusing really hard. Is both from encouraging diversity in communities that already exist, but also getting parkour introduced to communities where it doesn't exist, and being able to plant and to help foster small organizations to help them grow.
Yeah.
Finding organizations that are doing diversity well and learning the lessons from them and trying to, I mean, Blake and I will say that, and helping those organizations share those lessons in a positive way.
Yeah. Great. Something that hasn't come up at all really about when we talk about what Parkour Earth does is, well, it's kind of come up, but we haven't really talked about it that much, is the protection of parkour, capital P parkour. That's where Parkour Earth came from, responding from the initial threat of FIG. I mean, where does that sit now, or where does that sit in your mind as part of what we're doing?
Well, to me, I mean, that is the main, reason for Parkour Earth existing, and that's kind of, why I really appreciate the organization. But I think to me, it goes back to pretty much all of the other stuff we're talking about, where I think its mission is best accomplished by, providing resources and, being a, legitimate organization in the eyes of the average practitioner, and, all of the other, helping with diversity and inclusive, practices and guides and everything. I think that's going to be ultimately the route to protecting parkour. It's just by being a really good organization.
Yeah.
So one of the stories that I get a lot when I talk to people from other countries, because in the UK it's not an issue. Parkour UK is the recognised governing body, and gymnastics can't touch it. But when I talk with a lot of other countries, the one I've got the most experience of is the work that's happening in France. Is there's literally a war going on in many of them between the parkour communities and FIG trying to control parkour, and you've got to kind of step into that and go, well, FIG are going to try and run parkour classes, and the likelihood is they're going to have some success, but they're probably not going to have that much success. And what we need to do is we need to empower the side who are not working with FIG, and instead we need to help them. We need to give them access to the information. So let's imagine there was another claim to the national governing body that claimed it had 50 different countries recognizing it as the national governing body. Woe betide anyone who would believe such things. And if the way you did that was you went into each country, you found someone that vaguely looked right, you wrote a letter and you said, we recognize this person as the national governing body, then you've not created anything and helped them do anything. And so when FIG come in later and just swoop them up with money and help, then FIG will just beat you. But if instead what you do is you go and form partnerships with people, teach them what parkour means and how it's happening around the world, and form actual friendships and engagement with them, then even if they take the FIG money initially, then when you come back to it, they'll know that the real parkour isn't FIG. And if you hold on to that kind of idea, what will eventually happen is that your story will come through because you're the actual person that holds on to parkour and is actually living the parkour experience, and that can't be taken away from us. So they can win any macro fight and any high level fight at once, but it can't actually take the grassroots away from us if we actually behave like a grassroots organization.
It's
So
one of the
kind of
points
like
that is
guerrilla
really kind
warfare?
of, it's one of the points that has really struck me across, and it's been a common thread right from the first interaction that we've had, is that it seems like within the parkour community, there seems to be this real need to have a cohesive communication and resource center that's able to pick up the quality and the standards. But it's the structure of it, to me, is almost, it's a centralized, decentralized system, which is kind of counter everything that's out there. But it's what it is, because essentially that's what parkour is. Parkour is the experience of movement and the shared experience and knowledge of movement in an area which is both a community and a individual experience. Whereas a lot of other sports approach it from a different side of things. So it's been a common thread saying that we need a resource center, and or parkour needs a resource center, and parkour needs to be able to connect groups better and allow them access to these resources. And that comes through communication. And it's how do we fit your businesses into those kind of models? That's what we're asking. That's what I'm asking anyway.
I suppose those of us on the call aren't really interested as much in what you can do for us and more in what we can do for you. So for someone like me, it's more a case of let me help.
Okay. Well, in that case, what would you see your role as? I mean, how would you see yourselves as helping us grow this apart from these conversations in a practical manner?
Connecting and providing opportunities, being open to the discussions of us going, hey, we want to do this thing, for instance, and recognizing experience and letting that experience talk. So my expertise is in inclusive practice and creating diverse communities. And if you wanted to gain information about those things, I'd be a great person to talk to, and I'd happily share resources and information. And the way we construct a lot of our risk assessments and code of conducts and all the backstage stuff builds around those ideas. I know that each organization and business tends to have their own specialities and will speak to their own thing, but they'd be like, hey, can I give you stuff that you could then go on to use and develop? And then when it comes to physically doing the work, like, I can't offer to do all the work, but I would kind of be like, when it comes to the committees that go and do those things, so the creation of the standards and the creation of those things, we would be the people who'd be like, yeah, we'd love to help. It's the same thing that I'm doing with Parkour UK right now, where I'm saying, hey, let me help you make a good insurance package. Let me help you write a good risk assessment, instead of doing what a lot of bureaucrats will do, which is go and find an example template written by an example template written by an example template and give it to you and say, hey, look at this example. It's fucking useless. Let me write something useful, and then fix it yourself if you want, and find another expert and bounce it off us. Use us as scientific peers to review each other's work.
Mm.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, that's great. Thanks, John.
Yeah. On that point, of like how I'd like to help is just through kind of marketing and communication. I know marketing is kind of a dirty word with a lot of people, but to me, it just kind of dissemination of information. And a lot of times it's going to be, with traditional companies, it's like kind of this gross, how can I sell as much with this information? But I think there has to be some sort of realization that, you know, to some extent, algorithms do run our lives, where search engine optimization, where you show up in Google, does significantly affect the perception or the you know, the legitimacy of any given organization. I think there should be some consideration in terms of that, you know, that kind of stuff. And you know, if somebody is new to parkour, you know, a FIG probably has a PR branch in which they can just, you know, blast out these newsletters. They get tons of backlinks immediately. Any article they put out is going to be top rated for whatever that search term is. And I think having some amount of consideration for, you know, getting the word out there and getting people talking about Parkour Earth instead of FIG's initiatives. And again, through these grassroots organizations and through grassroots links, you can still overcome, you know, like big PR campaigns if you play them right.
One of the really cool things about having a community of people that wants to help you is that if you create the right framework that makes them feel like they're empowered to do so, you'll get a lot done. So what you can create is really clear ways that I can help you, and then I will help you because it's easy for me. So if you make it easy for me to help you, I'll help you. If you make it easy for Tom to give you his expertise in marketing, he'll help you because we want to. That good faith exists. But we're not going to bend over backwards and write emails to get permission to do it. You have to kind of create a way in which it's very simple for them. Might be creating very clear rules on what you can and can't do and then get sign off. It means creating sandboxes for people to, so if you think about it from a software development perspective, a way that this is often done is they create sandboxes for people to play in. They create things, they show what works well, and then you adopt it. So you have that line where you have to approve it. If you can create that sort of, it's a little bit like a lean marketing technique, but it's a little bit different as well. Then you can create opportunities for us to kind of contribute and give to you. And that vastly multiplies the amount of power that you have the potential to wield because you have this groupthink going on.
I think this is, you guys are starting to answer it already, but this is, I think, the challenge of Parkour Earth. How do you genuinely engage a global community and genuinely use that size of the community and that expertise to force multiply, essentially? We're never going to have as many employees as FIG, at least not in the next 5, 10, 20 years probably. But that doesn't necessarily mean we don't have the same amount or more people contributing to the effort. I know this is like probably the most frustrating thing because you guys keep asking me questions, then I just keep saying, yeah, good question. What do you think? But that's what I'm going to do. I mean, how do we make that simple? How you guys are all experts at this already through Discord, through your organization, whatever. What if you found that works?
So for us, it is that authentic communication. I harp on this a lot. Anytime I'm teaching anybody Kickstarter or anything, that's like the #1 thing, because that's something that at the end of the day, if somebody has ulterior motives, they will come out when you're talking about authenticity. That's like, so we recently just had a huge gap in our supply line, and we're just like, well, things are seriously screwed right now. And what we did was we went ahead and we wrote like a big blog post that was like exactly how we're being screwed right now. And that's not a good look for a lot of investors. So like for big companies, they will not let you do that kind of stuff because they think it'll impact the brand negatively. But because we're trying to be as transparent as possible, that's something that worked for us. And like the top comment on the Reddit thread is just like, Soylent and Jimmy Joy and whatnot can learn from this level of transparency and communication. And that's the thing, like Soylent, it's crazy. Every single time that Soylent talks to investors or other businesses, they're like, we read the Soylent subreddit every single day. And I have no doubt that they do. But the amount of communication they actually have on there, it's very minimal. And they obviously can see the frustration that some people have. There are a lot of other companies there that can see different frustrations and stuff, but for one reason or the other, they cannot be transparent and communicate the same way. And I think that's going to be like kind of a very big competitive advantage, is just having these really open meetings, having that transparency, not having those ulterior motives. And that will end up, paying out in the long run.
I'm actually a big fan of the committee structure that USPK uses in order to help people who want to contribute to a discussion. I don't know the exact language, Blake, you could probably talk better about it, but the fact that you can, if you get enough people, you can create people to talk about a specific subject, and then they can set their own rules. And that allows people who are interested in competition to talk about competition, people who are interested about building standards to talk about building standards. Blake, can you?
Yeah, so it started, they were originally known as special interest groups. So groups that had a specific topic that they were interested in discussing. We're in the process of probably renaming those to knowledge committees, I believe. But the idea here is that people can kind of gather around a common topic or issue that they're passionate about and create something. And if they want to create guidelines or recommendations for the board of USPK, then they can be brought to the board. But it's all kind of happening within the network and framework of USPK so that things are official. But also we have a lot of kind of potential for individual agency and action.
That's super cool. How do they engage? Is it in person? Is it online? Is there a platform?
We haven't had an in-person meeting yet since our very first session, like 3 years ago, partly because we were supposed to have some stuff. We've had informal meetings at Art of Retreat the last 2 years, but there's invariably one of us missing at one point from the board. And then I think most of the discussion is either held through Slack or through regular meetings, kind of via Zoom or Hangouts. So we have a USPK Slack channel that we have a number of people that are engaged on, and we try to keep stuff on there. I realize that might be less practical from an international perspective, but it might also work better than just a constant chain of emails because it allows us to separate everything out to individual committees.
And so even these special interest groups or knowledge committees, those are the platforms they're using?
Yeah, so they each have a channel within Slack that they can have kind of discussion based on, and then therefore it's a centralized space, and it can still kind of, the board members can still see what's going on, and there's easy access to board members to kind of create action, but then there is kind of a separate kind of forum or space for people to discuss.
Mm.
Blake, do you have this is just a kind of a personal thing. Let's link up after this because I do want to hear more about this. I feel like I'm more involved in the UK kind of stuff right now, and I should probably be listening more to what's happening in the US as well.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
I think, hey, Tom, just since you unmuted, I'm curious to know where does a platform like Discord come in? And I'm curious, there's such rich discussion happening there. What's the unique value there? Or, I mean, why is it there and not, say, a Facebook group or whatever?
So I think Discord is, I think, uniquely accessible. It is very, very much like Slack. I think both of them use almost the same kind of channel structure. But I think the ability to sign in as a guest, of course, that's not going to happen on like these public servers to prevent spam. But I think it's very, very accessible. It has a huge user base. That's just from gamers, and there's definitely a big overlap between that and the parkour community. And I think the ease of use, and I think in the end it's just from a branding perspective, it's a lot less intimidating. I don't like using. I have a group where I do use Slack, but Slack does have a reputation for being business and being professional, and if you want somewhere to hang out, that's not the best kind of mindset to be in. Whereas Discord was made for gaming and made for hanging out, and it definitely has a lot of those features, and it is well featured enough to still have all the kind of business or professional things that you would need, because that's basically how we run Bite Ramen, is we use Discord. So I think Discord is definitely a better platform if you are to want to kind of communicate more with the average practitioner. And like I think it has that power as well in a professional sense, and it could be happening all on the same server, which I think is a really powerful thing. Like if we want, we have a private staff discussion server in the Jimmy the Giant server. If you wanted to expand USPK to its own server, you can have all of these special interest groups in their own roles, in their own discussion channels. But also because they're signed onto the same platform that you can use to communicate with your community at large, that gives everybody more incentive to just be involved in the community. I think that's kind of a really big thing, because then you just feel like somebody from the community, right? Like, what was that one time where what's his name, Anshuman, or however, he was like, oh no, I've been talking to like the CEO of Parkour Earth and I've been making these stupid jokes, and he just kind of freaked out for a moment. We're like, wait, that's exactly what we want to happen, like it's great that they see you guys as people first, and just like people who happen to be involved with Parkour Earth. Yeah, I love
that's
Discord.
super cool.
It's great.
I use Slack and Discord, and I think the point that Tom made that's really useful there is when I'm switching from my local community Slack to my Art of Retreat Slack, I have to go to a different tab. I have to switch, and I can only see one of them at a time. Whereas with my Discord servers, I'm only on 3, but they're all available to me at the same time, and I just click between them. So Discord's definitely got some advantages for this like relaxed, easy to use, just keep on in the background piece. And therefore you return to it, and therefore you use it. I think I'd probably, of the products available right now, that's what I'd recommend too, having engaged with quite a few. And this idea of closed community is really positive for me. So if you have yet never talked with Craig Constantine, you should. He's an interesting person, and he has this thing against social media. And what he wants is closed spaces where there's some restriction on getting in, but when you get in, then you know what the chat's going to be about. And you don't want to have these open facing ones where anyone can come in at any point. And so things like the Discord, it's like, okay, you're in a parkour server, it's about parkour. You can have a knuckle chat room, but it's still it's the parkour people talking about normal things. And so there's definitely value, and I would, like, if Parkour Earth created a Discord server, I'd join it tomorrow, and I'd try and help it build.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think thinking about the Parkour Earth, Parkour Research Facebook group, I think that slight level of barrier is probably why it still continues to have pretty good discussion on there. And I think you posted, Hedge, right at the beginning, sounds like .NET, and I joined Discord last week after we had Kieran in the call then, and I jumped into Discord immediately after that session, and straight away it felt like Parkour.net to me. Like, this is the community that I miss. It had that really nice feel to it. Anyway, I'm getting lost in my own nostalgia here. Look, guys, we've just hit time. There's no stress to leave immediately, but it is now time for the workshop to finish. But I just wanted to open up, any other things across anywhere on the mural that we've talked about that you want to make sure is in there, or any questions you want to ask that either Paul or Janne or myself can answer, or we can collect for the broader board.
We really need to figure out a better way to get a more diverse set of people having these discussions. We're still on the parkour boy thing, and we need to get better at that. And there needs to be discussion about it. There needs to be mechanisms about it. There needs to be a call to action, and it needs to be clear and definitive. You will have at least one woman on your call tomorrow because she's from my community, but still, that's not enough. You need lots more, and she will smash you hard if you don't. So figure out a way to make a definitive call to action, address it positively, and say, this is a thing we want to fix. And that will be, well, I'll respect you slightly more, so you got that for you.
Well, it's not the first time, and we're well aware of our demographics in our board at the moment. So that is certainly something that we'd want to fix, is these sorts of things. It's one of the reasons, and I think what we also got to take into account at the moment is there's certain fine things that we can fix and low-hanging fruit that we can fix, and there's other things that will only come about in time as the community grows and as our systems become more efficient. And I think we just, if we keep that in mind, we'll end up going in the right direction. So this engagement is to get our broad strokes going and point us in the right direction. And I have a feeling we're going to do a lot more of these over time, and we'll be able to fine tune a lot of these things out. But representation is one of the big ones which is up there. So we will address it as soon as possible.
Yeah, but if you do it from the start, it doesn't look like you're tacking on at the end.
Yeah.
Which is an important part. And if that's just one of the calls that in the next round is, we recognize that we didn't get enough people from diverse backgrounds, we're having a call that's directly trying to talk to women, that will benefit the community.
Yeah, actually, that kind of gets to one of the questions in my head is, as soon as we started designing these sessions, we ran into a bunch of questions around, of course, engaging women in the community is a big area that needs focus. But at that global level, you're also talking about geographic diversity. You're talking about multilingual diversity. There's a whole bunch of things, and I guess we were hoping to get some indication from these sessions, where's the gap? And I think we've had good representation from some parts of Africa, good representation from the UK or Europe and the US, but then completely missed, except I think one participant from Asia. And I'm using, I mentioned the US, I meant Americas in general. We've had a few participants from North America, and then a few participants from South America and Latin America as well. But I wanted to get a steer from you guys as well. Are there specific groups you think are probably quite large within the community, but also still fit within a minority or a particular group that we should be engaging in the next round?
I think the lowest hanging fruit probably would be non-English speaking. So I think if you had one of these discussions in kind of Spanish, French, you'd probably be able to tap into a lot of communities that are not necessarily predominantly English speaking. And having traveled to a number of those communities, I think there is a lot that is not necessarily overlaid with the English speaking community.
Yeah.
German community is huge.
Which one?
The German community.
Yeah. And so we'd actually made plans to run additional of these sessions in French and Spanish, purely because we've got facilitators who speak French and Spanish. So if you know a really good facilitator who speaks German, please feel free to put their name forward.
Your best bets might be some of the PK1 guys, both Ben and Martin would be really good.
Yeah. Any other sort of broad groupings you think we should be thinking about in this more diverse sort of call?
I mean, maybe because it's given, it's at the forefront of everything here in the US right now, but I think there is a pretty stark underrepresentation of Black and brown folks, so non-white.
Yeah, I totally agree. We picked that out quite early on, even before these discussions came through. But it's trying to engage those cultures as well. So I know in Africa we're going to have to find quite a diverse way of getting these languages out. So I'd probably have to translate into at least 5 or 6 different languages in order to try and get that kind of level of engagement just in my own country. So yeah, I think it's something that we're going to have to tackle and deal with, but it might be something at the moment where unfortunately it might, just because of our resources and what we are and who we are, that it might take a little bit longer than we would like. But I'm yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Paul. I was just to say that I think one way to potentially combat that might be to have some sort of regionalization or kind of continental outreach that's going on in one person or one group that's tasked with really getting a diversity of opinions. Because I think that in general, kind of the Western European groups are dominant in a lot of this discussion, but having a voice from Africa, and as you say, you know what languages and cultures need to be addressed. So it doesn't make sense to have somebody from the US or from Australia kind of doing the outreach. It makes sense to have somebody that's more closely tied in with that region. So having kind of Southeast Asia, Africa, kind of Central America, South America, however we want to divide that up, I think having that outreach is really important.
Which of course requires to find people in those places that are bilingual and able to do that translation and willing to do it. But of course, one of the things about, if you don't put inclusivity at the heart of what you do, you just keep putting it off. And that's the classic, I mean well, and I'll get around to it one day. And then 10 years have passed and you've still not done anything about it. And that is the problem. The problem isn't people who don't want to put inclusivity at the heart of things. The problem is people thinking that they'll get around to it and never actually doing so.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah. Any other last questions, comments, additions?
I have a question. I was invited to these discussions very coincidentally. I always want to ask where do I sign up? How can I become more involved in similar discussions, just in Parkour, Earth in general, know what you guys are doing, what you guys are up to. I've heard of you before once or twice, literally that many times, and decided to check it out. And my heart has always been legacy, to build something with Parkour where I am, and we interlink where we can and when we can with PKSA when we're around. But yeah, I understand that we need to start working together and build it from an international level and build all these things in so that there's something sustainable in parkour in 10 or 20 years from now, even after we're done, so that they can not have this problem of saying, yeah, but Figure's so big because they've been here for so long, that we're already there and that's in a similar space.
Paul or Jan?
Yeah. Look, I think that's what we're trying to get in at the moment is we're trying to find out what structures need to be in place. Often these when organizations are formed, I mean you take into account FIG and the way the IOC and all these other big federations are created. It really ends up being an old boys club, which isn't what parkour is about. Parkour has been kind of grown out of something that's not a club at all. More that it is as I keep saying, it's a shared experience that we go through because you're doing it with doing something that you enjoy with somebody else who's enjoying it as well, and that's something that other federations often don't have because it's seen as a pyramid scheme with the president at the top and the lackeys at the bottom, which are the practitioners. And we all we have to sign up to this big behemoth of an organization, and that organization will provide for us. Whereas I've always seen it in this kind of situation, the way we're approaching it is we're getting the tools from you guys. We want to know where the best building is to be put and which is the right infrastructure that we need to put in, which is why we're asking. So if we need a channel and a better channel in order to attract people with different skills into this, we'd need to know what channels those are and where to find them within the community and how do we best bring those out of the community. It's that kind of information that at the moment we're very interested in because that will help us lubricate the pathways for you guys to do your business and to be involved on a more global scale.
Well, I don't know if it's too, well, I think it like the blunt way of putting it, and pull me up, Paul, if it's too blunt, but the answer is really we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Hence these sessions. And I think, for the moment, my understanding is actually most of the engagement happens direct to one of the board members, or whether it's to Damien or Paul or Jan or whoever. It's through personal connections. It's through, I know Damien or I know Paul and I have their email and I get in touch, or I contact them over Facebook, or we engage in a thread on a particular group on Facebook or Discord or whatever. And I think the point is here, and particularly in that last conversation, there's a really strong willingness for Parkour Earth to not rely on that as its sole means of communication. And I think out of this process, there needs to be a clear platform that'll have to come out of it. So I think the interim answer is keep engaging directly. You'll have Damien's email now. I have no uncertainty that if you email Damien and said, what can I do? He'll jump on it. Or if you email Damien and say, like Hedge or Tom, what you guys said, I'm good at comms, or I'm good at inclusivity policies. I want to do that under the Parkour Earth. I want to help Parkour Earth banner. I have no doubt that they'll jump on that. So in this early stage, I think it's still super one-to-one connectivity, but I think there's intent to change that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did want to chime in. From my perspective, I think that would probably be the biggest first step for Parkour Earth, is just set up systems to make it easier to find out what's going on and find out and to it help make it easier for people to be involved. Because I remember when I was first kind of getting back into parkour and like looking up all the governmental organizations and stuff, I saw the website for Parkour Earth and I was like, this sounds awesome. I looked up a couple of things you guys were doing and I was like, this is great. But what's going on right now with Parkour Earth? Like the social media wasn't super active. There was, and like if you wanted any sort of involvement or news, it was just like punch in this, email form at the bottom. And like, now I know you guys are super responsive to that kind of stuff, but like there's so many websites where I've been to and you punch in an email form and you never get a response back that like, and I think I was talking about this with one of the other engagement things as well with another organization, but I think as a representative, the onus of communication should be on the governmental organization, not the practitioner to need to reach out. And I think you guys are already making strides to do that. I know you guys sent out individual invites to these, which is awesome. And I think that's a really good first step. But I would just like to see more of that, basically. Just like, how can we, contact more people and like directly invite them to be involved, or just make it as frictionless as possible to be involved or to voice their whatevers. Yeah.
I read that Discord thread, and seeming as we're past time, I can say I love that comment so much as a clear Parkour Earth supporter around the onus of communication. Yeah, great. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah.
Enrique.
Where we can find the previous recordings for the previous sessions? Is there like a repository of all the information that you are gathering up to this point?
Yeah, totally. So what happens next, at the end of this, the recording goes back to the participants as a first port. But once we've finished all of these first rounds of sessions, and the last one in this first round is on Friday, all of those recordings will be made public. I'm not sure of the platform, to be honest, probably via the website and I would guess shared through the Facebook group as well, and emailed out to anyone who was a participant. All of this content in here as well, so we take that back to the board and then sift through it and then basically go through a process of saying, what are those common things? What are the outliers? What have we heard from the community that we can then craft into a strategy? And that'll turn into the Parkour Earth strategy at one level, and then the roadmap and the actions that are going to come out of it as the immediate next steps. So you'll get this recording after the session. Give it a couple of days, but you will get it, and then it'll be made completely public once we've gone through this first round, both in audio and then the write-up once that's produced.
Okay.
There'll also be a process, I'm assuming, well, I'm not assuming, I know of translating the written stuff that comes out of this and trying to provide some more accessible transcripts. Cool. Well, I just keep asking anything else until there's nothing else. So please feel free to jump out right now. But yeah, last call if you have anything else.
No, thanks so much for the discussion.
Not for now.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. I really love the open discussion and being able to voice our thoughts. It's awesome.
Yeah, I
That's
want to
awesome.
thank you guys for participating and coming through and letting us know what you guys think. There's been a lot of my mind is certainly buzzing on ideas. So it's great to hear from you guys, and I look forward to seeing what you guys can do and what we can do in the future.
All right, awesome.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for your participation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye everybody.
Cheers.
Ciao.
Peace.
Good night.
Have a good one.